شكرا منى تفضلي.
Shukran. I'm going to answer the various questions on women, but in a different order that they were asked in. It's very important to look at the various Islamist groups and movements as also not being monolithic. We can't ask the so-called West to look at us as the diverse groups we are and then not extend that courtesy to the Islamists. So when I look at Al-Nahda, they're very different to the Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt, who are also quite different to the Salafi movements. When I look at Al-Nahda, and you know, the major difference, one of the major differences is again through women and women's involvement, as Nadine was emphasizing. When you look at Al-Nahda, not only do they have 42 of the 49 seats that women won in the Tunisian Constituent Assembly, but they have women in decision-making positions. When the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt had the chance to allow women into their Guardian Council, and the Guardian Council is basically the top echelon that vote for the Supreme Guide, they turned down that chance, which says to me, as recently as 2007, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt were not interested in having women in decision-making positions. They were interested in women as foot soldiers, which then takes me to the worst-case scenario, which is the Salafis. Because for me, the Salafis are the worst of the worst. I am against the niqab. I want to ban the niqab everywhere, which I know is a controversial position. It's not part of this discussion. I'm willing to argue with anyone outside of this discussion about this. But the reason that I bring this up is to touch what this gentleman was talking about, and this is where I disagree with you, Nadine. You cannot be a political party that claims to be running female candidates so that you can then defend yourself against feminists who say, you don't have women. You say, no, we have women, but your female candidates neither have a voice nor a face. You can't have a woman on an election pamphlet who doesn't have a face. She has a rose, a flower represents the woman, and then when they made fun of them, they put her husband. So she is now a non-entity who is represented as Mrs. So-and-so. Then why doesn't her husband run for parliament? I want to know. And then when she goes to parliament, we're told, I'm getting angry here because they really piss me off. When she gets to parliament, we're told that she's not even going to be able to speak because a woman's voice, according to Salafi ideology, is awra, and so she's going to have to speak through her husband. What kind of upside-down ideology is this, and where does this fit into a revolution? It doesn't. So we have to call it as we see it. Al-Nahda is miles ahead of Al-Ikhwan. I'm willing to dialogue with Al-Nahda. I want to see the women who are in Nahda and who are in positions of power in Al-Nahda really stand up and say, we are listening to women and men, and if they don't perform their roles, just as Nassim was saying, they will get voted out. But Al-Nahda is in a completely different position because Tunisian society is in a different position. It was born, or it continues, not born rather, its development was arrested, but now it has been reborn in a society that has years of secularism, in a society that has a constitution that bans polygamy, in a society that has laws and a constitution that recognize gender equality in a way we don't in Egypt. And you're absolutely right when you say that, you know, we talk about state-controlled media, we had state-controlled feminism. And we have to fight this idea that it was only the mother of the state, Suzanne Mubarak or Leila Tarabolsi or all these other women who were married to our dictators, who are the patrons or the matriarchs rather of feminism. We have fantastic female activists who work on the ground in Egypt, in Tunisia, in all these other countries, who have been working for a very long time to get some very difficult legislation in place. Where I jump into what you were asking about, Bushra, now, and what this gentleman was asking about women being the biggest losers, women will not lose for several reasons. And one of the main ones is that we do have grassroots, homegrown feminist organizations that might still be, in the bigger scheme of things, look like they're weak, but they will get stronger, and they have a presence. And I'm thinking of one in Egypt especially called Nazra, which is the Arabic word for vision. And it was founded by men and women, which is important. We need men in this as well as women. This is not just for women, it's an entire society, because when you look at feminism, it doesn't just question the role of women, it also questions traditional notions of masculinity, which are just as harmful to men as they are to women. So this movement called Nazra in Egypt looks at all of that, masculinity, femininity, looks at women's involvement in politics. It is creating a list in Egypt to follow and monitor all the women who are running for parliament and offer whatever help and services they can to these women. Muslim women, Christian women, women of various political and faith backgrounds. And it's groups like that and other groups across the region that will ensure that women do not lose. I am worried, my worry is according to the development of the various countries. And I'm actually more worried about the women of Egypt than the other countries because of the growing conservatism we have in Egypt and because the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the most powerful of all these Islamic groups, is so patriarchal. When I see women in the Guardian Council of the Muslim Brotherhood, then I will be able to say there is a dialogue possible. The Muslim Brotherhood is not the AK party in Turkey. They're nowhere near the party in Turkey, and they like to point to them and say, you see, you can have Islamists in power and it's okay. They're not that developed. So it will take these grassroots movements who will then tell society at large, feminism was not a gift from Suzanne Mubarak or anyone else. Feminism is a struggle that we fight for. And this polygamy business, and I'm going to end on a humorous tone here, because I know I've been getting very angry. To counter the polygamy in Libya, I have come up with a campaign that will solve youth unemployment in Egypt. We are told that this ban on polygamy in Libya is being lifted because of the widows. Now, I don't believe that most men who have polygamous marriages actually marry widows. I think they go and marry 20-year-olds and pretend they're marrying widows and they want to help them. So the way that I'm going to help the Egyptian revolution is to propose to the military council in Egypt to allow women to take multiple husbands, because we have many unemployed young men in Egypt, and there are many women like myself who make a good living, and we are able to support 3 or 4 men. And I think when I'm allowed to marry 3 or 4 men and I can support them, I will directly help the Egyptian revolution by lowering the rates of youth unemployment and directly helping the revolution to succeed. So this is how I will fight this kind of thinking that thinks that women must lose. We will not lose.
شكرا منى. Marianne?
I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I think there are people who sort of, want to paint this utopian paradise picture that everything is going to be perfect now that we've got rid of the dictators. And then there are people who, sort of the perennial pessimists who tell you that everything is going to the dogs and we're going to, be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. The truth does lie in the middle for every one of these countries. I don't know a single activist in any one of these countries who believes that they would be better off by going back to the situation before the revolution. That is a consensus. Everyone believes that with all the problems, all the challenges, all the risks that they're now confronting, that they are better off today than they were in 2010. That is universal. I haven't heard a single contradiction to that. The reality is that there are real threats from extremists of various kinds, ideologues of various kinds, and not just local ones, international ones as well. I mean, the threats of economic ideology being imposed on some of these countries are just as severe as the more social or religious or political ideologies that are being sought to be imposed. The reality is that we're all, in the region and outside the region, anyone who believes in democracy, in the rule of law, in basic freedoms and dignity for everyone, is going to have to fight this battle day by day, street by street, election by election. It's not easy. Nobody said it was going to be easy. And I would not, I find it, I come from India, where I have seen rural women who have never been to a formal school in their life affect radical change in their communities when they've been elected into offices. So I would not judge women by their levels of education, what language they speak or what they wear. Personally, I think the 4.5-inch high heel is more oppressive than the niqab, but that's my personal opinion. So that's where I'll leave it.
شكرا ماريان. الأسئلة الكثيرة التي تتحدث عن الخوف من تراجع وضعية المرأة في البلدان اللي تعرضت للثورة تذكرني بحديث جانبي كان جمعني بأحد قيادي حزب العدالة والتنمية الإسلامي في المغرب ماشي في تركيا على هامش إحدى اللقاءات. فقال القيادي: لماذا لا تنضمين إلى حزبنا، إلى حزب العدالة والتنمية؟ سألته مازحة: هل أنا مضطرة لوضع الحجاب كي أنضم إلى الحزب؟ أعتقد أن جوابه يستدعي التفكير. لست مضطرة لوضع الحجاب، تنضم إلينا نساء كثيرات لا تضعن الحجاب، لكنهن بعد ذلك يقتنعن من تلقاء أنفسهن بوضع الحجاب. هذا ما يقول عنه عالم الاجتماع الفرنسي بورديو: العنف الرمزي الذي قد يمارس يعني على المرأة من طرف السلطة الأبوية. عرفنا أنه مؤخرا بعد الثورة في تونس تعرضت إحدى الأستاذات الجامعيات للضرب للعنف من طرف طلبتها على أساس أنهم اعتبروا أن التنورة أو الفستان الذي كانت ترتديه كان أقصر من اللازم. هذا في تونس يعني بلد اللي كان قدوة ومثال في الحريات بالنسبة للمرأة. اليوم هذا الصباح انتشر فيديو على اليوتيوب في حادثة وقعت في مصر لشاب كان مع صديقته وكان يضع يديه على كتفها. وصلوا هذا الصباح إلى الشرطة بتهمة المس بالأخلاق العامة في الشارع العام. هذه أحداث عرضية. في السعودية كانت فتاة تعرضت للاغتصاب وتمت محاكمتها بسبب الفساد لأنها كانت في سيارة مع شخص غير محرم، بينما كانت قد تعرضت للاغتصاب من طرف 4 أشخاص. دونك لا نحاكم الرجل أو الرجال الذين قاموا بالاغتصاب، نحاكم المرأة التي كانت في السيارة مع رجل غير محرم. هذه ربما مجرد أحداث جانبية تقع هنا وهناك، لكنها تبعث بالفعل على طرح مجموعة من التساؤلات عن إلى أين نحن سائرين. نأخذ سلسلة ثانية وأخيرة من الأسئلة، 5 أسئلة. الأخ كان رفع يده من قبل.
شكرا. عبد الرحيم العسري، طالب ماستر جورناليزم اند تراديكسيون مدرسة الملك فهد العليا للترجمة. أشكر المتدخلين. في انسجاما مع النقاش الإعلام الجديد، نعم بالفعل لقد استطاع الإعلام الجديد أن يشكل رأيا عاما حول مجموعة من القضايا التي كانت تعتبر كما أشار المتدخل أسامة كانت تعتبر طابو أي محظورة من قبيل النقاش في الشبكات الاجتماعية، فساد في مؤسسات الجيش، فساد في الانتخابات، فساد في الطبقة الحاكمة. كل هذه الإعلام الجديد ساهم في خلق هذه النقاشات وكان بديلا بالفعل على المعارضة السياسية والأحزاب السياسية. السؤال هو أنني لا أعتقد على أن الشبكات الاجتماعية ستلعب بديلا سياسيا القيادة السياسية أو الأحزاب أو المنظمات المجتمع المدني، على اعتبار إذا رجعنا لمصر وتونس لأن لولا انضمام يعني القيادة السياسية والنقابات إلى الثورة أعتقد أنها كانت ستواجه الكثير من الصعوبات. وهذا دليل على أن في بعض البلدان التي تأثرت بالربيع العربي يعني عدم اندماج الأحزاب السياسية اللي هي متخاذلة لم تستطع أن تنتزع.
شكرا، وصلت الرسالة. شكرا. اسمح لي لأن ما بقاش الوقت بزاف. عند سؤال عند الأخت في آخر القاعة. سأطالب الجميع إذا سمحتوا بأسئلة مختصرة لأنه ما بقاش الوقت. السؤال كان عند الأخت، اسمح لي. أعطيت الكلمة للأخت من بعد نعطيها لك، غير هي اللي أعطيتها الكلمة الأولى.
مساء الخير، زينب بوجرادة، طالبة في سنة ثانية من مدرسة الحكامة والاقتصاد. سؤالي يتعلق بتونس. هل يمكن القول على أن بعد أن وصلت النهضة إلى الحكم أن تونس والعادات الاجتماعية سترجع إلى عهد ما قبل بورقيبة؟ وماذا يمكن للمجتمع المدني أن يفعل في هذا الصدد؟ وشكرا.
شكرا. يمكن تأخذ الميكرو الآن.
Bonsoir, Mohamed Bouskri, élève, étudiant en 2e année à l'école de gouvernance et d'économie de Rabat.
Alors, قبل ما تعطي السؤال حتى يوضعوا لا ترادكسيون غير شويه ديال الوقت. It's okay. تفضل.
Donc ma question va se résumer autour du rapport entre l'espace d'expression des sociétés civiles arabes et Internet, le rôle qu'ils ont joué ensemble dans les révolutions arabes. En fait, je voudrais savoir si, selon vous, Internet a été seulement un moyen d'expression, c'est-à-dire qu'il a permis aux sociétés arabes de communiquer sur leur volonté de lutter contre les régimes arabes, ou au contraire, il a été le moteur, c'est-à-dire que sans Internet, il n'y aurait jamais eu les révolutions arabes. Je voudrais savoir juste le moyen, enfin le lien que vous faites entre les deux. Merci.
شكرا. سؤال عند الأخ هنا. اوكي انا غادي نشوف. للاسف ما غاديش يمكن كل شيء ياخذ الكلمه. تفضل.
Bon, Amara Ahmed, étudiant en 5e année à l'ENCG de Tanger. Ma question, c'est plutôt, j'ai une demande de faveur ou d'éclaircissement. En bénéficiant des déductions des révolutions de la Tunisie, l'Égypte et même la Libye, quelles sont vos recommandations ou vos conseils pour la bonne réussite des révolutions potentielles pour la population désirant une vraie démocratie ou une vraie liberté.
الثورة في 5 أيام. سؤال أخير عند الأخ هنا.
السلام عليكم، ياسر المختوم صحفي بجريدة الجديد. سؤالي موجه للجميع بالخصوص إلى الزميلة منى. ألا تعتقد أن فزاعة الإسلاميين سقطت وإلى الأبد مع هبوب رياح التغيير العربي؟ وهنا أنا أعتبر أن الحديث عن تراجع حقوق المرأة مع الثورات يدخل في هذا النطاق. ألا تعتقد أن يجب أن نحتكم جميعا إلى الديمقراطية مهما كانت نتائجها؟ نحتكم إلى صناديق الاقتراع، القرار للشعب وفقط. أخيرا علينا أن نقبل بقواعد اللعبة مهما كانت النتائج. ما رأيكم؟ وشكرا.
شكرا. وسنبتدئ المداخلات بالعكس. السيدة مريان سرينات تفضلي. ممكن يعيد سؤال؟ ممكن تعاود السؤال ديالك إذا سمحتي باش تفهمك منى.
باختصار أنا تساءلت هل يمكن أن نقول أن رياح التغيير العربي أفرزت لنا مقولة أن فزاعة الإسلاميين قد سقطت إلى الأبد، وأنا هنا قلت أن الحديث عن تراجع حقوق المرأة مع الثورات العربية يدخل في هذا النطاق، وبالتالي ألا تعتقدون أن يجب أن نحتكم إلى صناديق الاقتراع؟ هي القرار، الشعب هو الذي يقرر مهما كانت النتائج، وعلينا أن نقبل بالنتائج وبقرار الشعب سواء كانت للإخوان المسلمين أو للإسلاميين أم لغيرهم. هذه هي قواعد اللعبة، علينا أن نحتكم إليها جميعا، أليس كذلك؟
شكرا. وصلت الرسالة. ونبدأ من السيدة مريان سرينات.
On the role of the new media and the internet, I mean, clearly I think you've heard this numerous times already. They've been really amplifiers, accelerators, catalysts rather than, the revolutions would have eventually happened. There was all the other factors were already in play: inequality, corruption, greater awareness of the roots of the problem, poverty. So the revolution was inevitable. The timing of it, the speed of it, the pace of it, the scale of it, I think was helped by the internet. But I think sometimes when we talk about the use of the internet and social media as tools for revolution, we sometimes miss something bigger about them. I think the social media, Facebook in particular, is offering us an interesting glimpse of what governance is going to look like in the 21st century. This is a community of 800 million plus people. It's the third most populous entity on the planet. Only China and India have a bigger population than Facebook. Its users pay nothing, so they're not customers in the conventional sense of the word, and yet they all believe they have a say in determining what policies Facebook can and cannot implement. So I think much more than their role as amplifiers and catalysts, I think the social media are throwing up some really interesting models of governance and democracy that we should be studying more carefully across, by the way, government or civil society. I think the other thing that is going to be critical in each of these transitions is ensuring basic civil society architecture is ensured. So ensuring, for example, the constitutional guarantees on freedom of assembly, freedom of association, on looking at what those NGO laws look like. The new Egyptian NGO law is retrograde in the extreme. It needs to be repealed now. And all of the activists that fought for that freedom need to get behind a campaign to ensure the NGO law is right. Because if you don't have an enabling NGO law, you're not going to have freedom, regardless of what else you may do, regardless of whether you have the internet or not. So I think there's a set of basic civil society architecture pieces that we need to focus on, that will ensure representation for women, that will ensure constitutional guarantees that are not subject to hostile takeover by this party or that are immune to changes in government, that are immune to particular ideological formations coming to power. I mean, there's a lot of learning on this. This is not, you don't need to reinvent this wheel in a sense. You can customize it, you can adapt it, but the wheel already exists.
أعتقد أن هناك مشكل في الترجمة بالنسبة للغة العربية. إذا ممكن يتحل هذا المشكل التقني منى تفضلي.
Shukran Sana. I'm going to answer the question about Tunisia and the question that you asked me about women and election results. In Tunisia, Ennahda have won the majority of the vote, 40%. They have to remember all the years that they lived basically in a political and cultural exile in Tunisia. And they should not and must not recreate that kind of exile for their own political opponents. You asked a very good question, is Tunisia now going to go back to a pre-Bourguiba time? I don't think so, because as many of my co-panelists mentioned already, this is not that same time. Our means of communication are very different, just as I don't think that the revolutions will turn into the Iranian nightmare scenario that people keep bringing up. But what is a real challenge to all these revolutions is whoever or whomever ends up winning the majority must remember, especially if they do come from an Islamist background, as different and as diverse as the Islamists are, one thing they've all had in common is state repression. Well, everyone has had state repression, but we've heard the most about the repression the Islamists have faced, and it will not benefit them or anybody to recreate that kind of repression against their political opponents. That will just be a disastrous recipe in the making. To take it to your question about elections and shouldn't we respect election results, if I understand wrongly, then please correct me, but you cannot say the majority of people have voted to take your rights away. That is just absolutely wrong. You can't in America, in the United States, for example, say the majority of people have voted that blacks should not have rights. That is absolutely wrong. So I really don't care if the majority, the Muslim Brotherhood or Ennahda or the Salafis win a majority. That cannot and must not then equal. Women do not have equal rights. Christians do not have equal rights. That kind of basic rights must be determined by a basic set of laws and a constitution that guarantees rights for everybody. You cannot have the tyranny of the majority. That's something that the United States has long worked on and continues to work on. In the United States, I'm a joint citizen, a dual citizen. We do not have it perfect in the United States, but there is an absolute recognition that you cannot have a tyranny of the majority. So you might have a majority of people in parliament who are Islamist of one nature or another, but they cannot use that majority to strip away anybody's rights. There has to be a basic set of principles that guarantees equality and freedoms for everybody, regardless of election results.
شكرا منى. أعتقد أن مشكل الترجمة ما زال واردا، بما أني أنا أرى أنه يعني أغلبية القاعة من المغاربة. هل يمكن نادين أن أطلب منك المداخلة بالعربية؟ لا، أوكي، سنستمر بالإنجليزية، وأتمنى أن يتم حل مشكل الترجمة بسرعة لكي تتمكن أغلبية القاعة من المتابعة. خذي راحتك تفضلي بالإنجليش.
Okay, one of the things, going back to the rights and building on what Muna said, actually we don't disagree. You said you disagree. I'm just saying we need to respect people's rights no matter what their viewpoint was, and even if they decide to wear the niqab. I carry this around with me, and I've carried it around with me for years. It's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this is what my constitution looks like. This is what I believe in, and this is what I'll follow. I don't care what the Egyptian constitution ends up looking like, because they have signed on to this, and I will hold them to this standard. So if it's an Islamist, and this is why I don't fear the niqabi woman, because you know what, I'll tell her, you as a country, we've decided that these are the basic rights, and this isn't an anti-religious document. This is a religious document in every sense of the word. I don't think Islam is anti-human rights. In fact, I think in its truest base, it is human rights, and it is looking at the rights of the individuals. We have this conversation in some of the organizing committees. Which one is more socialist or leftist? Is it Christians or Muslims? Is it Muhammad or Christ? And you have this argument going on. And it's, for me, a sign that we're, as activists, as human rights activists, we don't throw our religion behind our back. We hold it in front of us and say, this is what it actually means. And one of the things that, this is going to sort of sound like my closing statement, but mass media and looking at social media, whether you're talking about mass media, social media, you're looking at all this, you have to have a basic understanding as an activist of what you really believe in. And whether you're going on TV, whether you're talking on social media, whatever sphere you're going on, you're looking at something else. And for me, yes, this is my fundamental document, but also in answering the question about what other activists can do is doing the work on the ground. If I'm defending people's rights and I don't know what they want, then I'm not really defending their rights. I have to go into the Ashraiyat, I have to go into Upper Egypt, I have to go into the disenfranchised communities and not just work with them and educate them from I'm up here and you're down here. But you know what? They know what they want. They want much simpler rights than what we're talking about here. They want the right and access to shelter. They want the access to clean water. They want the access to healthcare, which are also included here. But we have to look at that. We have to look at these communities. We have to work for them from the ground up. So I think while we're talking about feminists and some of these large words, you have to understand, at least from my perspective, is this doesn't just mean this word. This word is a symbol of really going down and meeting with the people and engaging with them. And I know Muna has done this. When she comes down to Tahrir, someone has told me, Muna, she's over here. These are young people who look up to her. She sets an example for young women. And I think that's important. If you look at that and look at how you actually interact, whether you're doing it through social media, whether you're doing it through mass media, or whether you're sitting down with a young girl telling her a story, this is the basic of what we do as revolutionaries and activists.
شكرا نادين. أسامة تفضل.
No, I know.
يعني الحقيقة هناك بس تصويب لمشكلة يعني لا أفهم أبدا تخوف أو سبب تخوف من أي حزب يصل إلى السلطة في عملية تحول ديمقراطي وهناك شعب أسقط ديكتاتورية كان عمرها 40 و50 عام. ألا يستطيع أن يسقط حزبا يعني وصل إلى السلطة عن طريق صناديق الاقتراع؟ ما سبب هذا التخوف؟ مهما كان هذا الحزب فليفعلوا ما يشاءون سيسقطون. يعني بكل بساطة لم يعد هناك تخوف من وصول شخص أو طرف أو جهة ما إلى الحكم لأنها ستسقط كما سقط غيرها. الشعب العربي الآن أصبح متيقظا وواعيا ولديه الأدوات ولديه الأساليب ليسقط أي نظام لا يعتبر بأنه يمثله أو يحافظ على حقوقه أو يصونها. فلا أرى أبدا أي مبرر الحقيقة من أي تخوف بهذا الإطار.
شكرا أسامة. والكلمة الأخيرة لنسيم.